I absolutely love it when my team gets to do a Adobe Commerce or Magento 2 audit. It's like a kid in a candy store, one of those dogs digging sand on the beach. They absolutely love doing it. And part of this is because we love to be analytical and to see like what doesn't align with best practices or how can we improve the performance of this particular area. And in fact, performance is what I'm going to be talking about today. One of the most performance crushing aspects or flags that you can put into layout XML is cacheable is false. And what that does is it eradicates all full page caching for this particular page, which, as you can guess from a performance standpoint, is pretty bad. And unfortunately, it's due to unfortunately used for cacheable as false flags and other similar types of mistakes that Magento gets a bad rap for having poor performance. I'm not saying that there's a lot of areas that it still can be improved in, but at the end of the day, there is some developer mistakes that can greatly exasperate this performance problem. And so today's question is actually centered around cacheable is false and a potential resolution for it. Before we jump in, though, if you are a developer who's wanting to learn more, get better at Magento, become really proficient, we have the materials to take you from A, hero, or to zero, you might just zero knowledge about Magento, up to Z, or hero. It's kind of backwards there, but SwiftOtter.com, we have the Magento 101 course. We have all the way up to really knocking out this game as becoming an expert on Adobe Commerce. Let's jump into our question here. While making some updates to a module, you discover that this specific block is set to be cacheable as false. Just what I was talking about. Upon investigation, though, you find that the block is not cached due to containing some session-specific information. However, you are concerned about the potential impact on performance and decide to update the block and remove the cacheable false flag. What can you do to keep the session data from being cached? Now, I want to bring up a really critical point. It is so easy to go into a code base and say, oh, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed, and oh, unbelievable. It must have been a toddler that wrote this code. I'm sure you've seen comments on Reddit like that. At the end of the day, the thing we have to always remember is there is a specific reason why somebody did something. And so instead of just going through and saying, oh, I'm going to fix it this way, I'm going to fix it that way, it's best to zoom out first, understand why the developer did it this way, and then take that into account. So with a cacheable false flag, it would be very dangerous to go and say, oh, what an idiot, and just zero out those and can move on with our day and then deploy code. And then the client is calling you up later saying, hey, we actually have some customers who are seeing other customers' data. And you're like, how did that happen? Well, fixing a mistake with a mistake is not a good solution. That's what this question is all about, because it says, what can you do to keep the session data from being cached? Now, we have three potential answers. Look at it this way. A, use the customer data JS library, JavaScript library to store private data in local storage. Use cache tagging for the session data. Or C, update the block code to use PHP sessions to manage the private data. Boom. Which one of those answers is correct or the most correct? Now, in this case, let's walk through each one of them and see which one we think is the right answer. A, use customer data JavaScript library to store private data in local storage. Now, this customer data JavaScript library is basically, well, you might say exclusively designed to take this customer data and store it locally. So basically, it's per customer machine. When they log in, this gets then saved down into their browser. And so obviously, it's not distributed across browser, but once they log in, then it would be distributed across the browser. Out of the box, what I know about Magento, this seems like a good answer. So let's move on to the next one. So B, use cache tagging for the session data. Now, this one could potentially work. However, yeah, let me just back up. It could potentially work. So basically, the idea is we add these caches, the cache tags in there, and then we can use the get identities or the identity interface really for these elements that are being cached or shown on the page. And so the idea is that whenever something changes, it would then flush out the cache for these items. And ultimately, then it also kind of works with full page caching too. This, in my opinion, is not a good approach. While in theory it could work, in reality, it's masking performance problems, or it's exposing, excuse me, it's exposing performance problems, because then these pages are constantly getting flushed out of the cache, having to be rebuilt. We're having a massive explosion in the number of cache entities. So instead of maybe for this one particular page, it's one value in the cache storage, now we have one for every customer that has to be stored in there. This is not a good solution. While in theory it could possibly work, long term it is not a good solution. So we are going to eliminate B from this. We have A as a contender. We have eliminated B, and let's check on C. Update the block code to use PHP sessions to manage the private data. Now, this one I would say is not a good solution. So the block code itself, well, yes, you could use PHP sessions potentially in there, but the reality is it's going to be cached by the full page caching system. You should be using Varnish, and Varnish has no communication with PHP at all. So I would say C is pretty much axed from this consideration as well. So we're basically down to A, use the customer data JavaScript library to store private data in local storage. Now, how does this work? I am going to show you inside the compare products, which actually, and ironically, turns out after I was doing this research, is the very one that we're putting a link here in the description that the Adobe Commerce private content document utilizes itself. So this is a great reference article, and I would highly recommend giving this a read here to increase your knowledge and become a better developer. What we see here is a customer data get products. Now, there's a couple aspects of this locally cached data. One of those is that we have to ensure that it gets refreshed on occasion. Ideally, it's cached in between times, etc. So I'm not going to go into the actual details, but I'm just pointing you into the right direction that this customer data, which we see loaded in here as Magento customer JS customer data. And that's what allows us to fetch this information. We do see a reload, which does force us to reload this information. It uses sections.xml. It works with di.xml in conjunction with section pool. And then finally, we have our compare products class, which then fetches and returns the information to be rendered on the front end. So again, using a very different paradigm than just rendering things out in PHP and forcing us to use cacheable as false. We are now using knockout templates. We're using knockout we're using knockout components or UI components of JavaScript, etc. But Magento kind of provides this middle layer for us to be able to utilize. At the end of the day, there is nothing stopping us from using a React application, fully possible, where we could roll our own using the fetch function in the browser, etc. Like there's a whole myriad of different options we have at this point. Again, edge side caching, if that's another term to be looking into here for researching this. But Magento kind of provides a framework that we can already use. It's like, unless we have a good reason, why not just use that? So with that, I propose A as the correct answer for this question. I would love to hear from you. If you have a better answer for me, please do drop that in the comments below. If you have other thoughts or suggestions, drop that in the comments below. This is a very important aspect to making your application more performant, more user-friendly, and ultimately, the other benefit I just thought of here as I'm recording this is it allows you to separate the front end and the back end even more. As you separate that, that's going to start moving you in the direction of going fully headless. But every little step that you can take in that direction is not a bad thing to take. So there is your knowledge bite here for this week.